Hannah Sell, the Deputy General Secretary of the Socialist Party.
Well, comrades, I've got a very difficult job. I'm the last speaker at an excellent rally which comes at the very end of what has been an excellent weekend. But before I come to the content of what I want to say, I would just comment, we haven't got the figures yet for how big socialism is this year. But it looks, from the size of the halls, like it is at least as big, probably about the same size as we achieved last year. And when you look at how our party has strained every nerve since the start of September to fight to build for the 20th of October demonstration and to intervene in that demonstration to call for a 24-hour general strike, for us to achieve the turnout we've got today, and particularly the number of new, young members and potential members of the Socialist Party, is a great achievement. Now, having said that, we're confident that in the coming years we are going to do far more, fill far bigger halls than we've been able to fill at Socialism this weekend. When we met here last year, it was about a month after the Occupy movement had begun. And of course it was the Occupy movement that coined the excellent phrase that we want a society for the 99% rather than for the 1%. But actually, when you look at the concentration of wealth under capitalism today, then it's a bit of an underestimate to talk about the 99% and the 1%. The Economist, a magazine which are evangelists for unregulated capitalism, as unregulated as possible. They had a feature on the question of inequality last month, and they talked about how globally it has returned to the Victorian era. They say about the US that the share of US national income going to the richest 1% has doubled since 1980, from 10 to 20%. Roughly where it was a century ago. But they go on to say, even more striking, the share going to the top 0.01%, some 16,000 families in the US, has quadrupled to almost 5%, again, more than it was a century ago. And they add that that isn't just America, that the same story can be told about Britain, about France, even as they put it, egalitarian Sweden. And they conclude that in the majority of countries on the planet, the inequality, the gap between a few at the top and a majority at the bottom is growing exponentially. They say the trend has been going on for 30 years, but they conclude perplexed, and yet suddenly it's becoming a political issue where it wasn't before, and they can offer no explanation for that. Of course, to us, it's glaringly obvious why that is a growing political issue. Because capitalism, as we've repeated again and again this weekend, has entered the worst crisis since the 1930s. And it's not news that there's a few at the top making incredible amounts of money. But when you're in a situation where your job is insecure, you're facing unemployment, where the majority of families face the nightmare that their own children will be considerably worse off than they have been, then the fact that there's a few at the top making vast amounts of money becomes an issue which causes rage. And there is no doubt there is growing rage against the capitalist system and what it represents. In Britain, the sharp edge of that rage comes in hatred of the Tory party. A party that gets a majority of its funding from the square mile and is dominated by millionaires. It's no surprise to us that Osborne was booed at the Paralympics. The nation raged, they must have done, as they watched the Tory party conference on TV. I would defy anyone not to throw things at the TV. When you hear them salivating, getting excited, whipping themselves into a frenzy, with the idea of taking all benefits, housing benefit, away from under 25-year-olds, talking about the feckless poor, ignoring the fact, as I think Rob said, there has been a doubling of the number of workers claiming housing benefit under this government as wages are pushed down and rents go up. That half of housing benefit claimants under 25 have children. that more than half of them work, and yet this government is getting excited about the idea of leaving them homeless. And then, in contrast, you get Osborne ruling out even the tiny, puny measure that the Liberal Democrats support, the idea of a mansion tax on properties worth over 2 million. And Osborne, you will have heard it, he actually said, we don't want to punish people who've worked hard for their mansions. This is a man whose own mansion is worth £3 million, and he's renting it out while he's the Chancellor, so that he gets an extra £200,000 a year in order to add to his puny salary as the Chancellor. You could repeat the same kind of story on every single front, every aspect of society. It is clear that shamelessly, brutally, this government, concluding, as Peter said yesterday, that they probably can't win the next election, are going to slash and burn, to destroy as much as they can, safe in the knowledge that they can create a wilderness and the Labour government that will follow will not do anything to reverse what has been smashed. Of course, that raises a question in the minds of Socialist Party members and other militant workers. Given everything we're facing, why hasn't the rage been greater? Why haven't there been bigger demonstrations, more strikes taking place? But it would be a profound mistake for us to underestimate the anger that is building in society. There's been much talk here on the question of the 24-hour general strike. The fact for the first time since 1972, the TUC have voted to consider a general strike. And as has already been said, rightly by Steve, it was the pressure of the National Shop Stewards Network, of this party, of unions like the POA and the RMT and the PCS that forced them to carry through that vote. But let's be clear, they would have brushed us all aside if it wasn't for the fact that even the right-wing trade union leaders can feel the ground moving under their feet. They can feel the anger that exists below, and so they felt they had no choice but to at least to be seen to consider taking some kind of action. Of course, there are different layers of the working class. Many of the most militant we saw on the magnificent demonstration on the 20th of October. They're, like us, to campaign to make sure that that demonstration was not just a parade, but led to serious action, cheering the calls for a general strike and so on. But I think it's the experience of many of our members in the trade union movement that there were other workers that you tried to mobilise to come on the 20th of October and who said, we came last year, but we're not coming this year. What's the point? Now, most of those workers don't articulate what lies behind that feeling of what's the point of demonstrating again. But we have to be clear, that is the consequence of the sellout last year in 2011 and a feeling that the demonstration was not necessarily going to lead anywhere. But at the same time, the pensions was only the tip of the iceberg of what those public sector workers are facing. And even if temporarily they feel like we can't change things, they are going to have no choice but to fight again, given the avalanche that is raining down on them that we've discussed this weekend. And there's no question, I don't want to spend time on this because a lot has been said about it, but there is no question, if the day was named for a general strike, then all of the workers who came out last year, all of the organised trade union movement and beyond that, could be mobilised in a huge display of strength. And it's right to talk about coordinating balance, to do everything possible to organise a general strike within the straitjacket of the anti-trade union laws. But at the same time, there's no question if the day was set that workers who have never been involved in trade unions would want to come out. And it will be the strength of that strike that ensures it is capable of brushing the trade union laws aside. And that means the points that have been made about going from here and fighting for the TUC to name the day, but also preparing the ground for it to be a success, particularly with mass meetings in the workplaces, is a crucial part of preparation for a 24-hour general strike. Now, we have a weak government. It's split on every issue, well, lots of issues, including the question of Europe. And even a one-day general strike in Britain could force them to retreat, could force them to call a general election. Of course, that's not guaranteed. And for us, a one-day general strike is a beginning. It will be most effective if it's part of a strategy to escalate, a strategy to win. So we come out for one day, but if you don't retreat, then we're prepared to come out again. But we have to be prepared that the intensity of the class struggle in Britain could lead to a general election before the next one is due. It could lead to this lot vacating the scene. What would be the outcome of a general election? Despite themselves, it is probably most likely you would get a majority Labour government. Not because people are enthusiastic about Labour, but because they want to get rid of this lot, and therefore will go out and vote through gritted teeth for a Labour government. Now, that's not what New Labour want. You could sum up what New Labour are by the fact that they don't aspire to a majority Labour government. They aspire to a coalition with the Cableites. Cable, a man who's shown off about how he knew that the next government would have to carry out cuts, and he argues for it in the Liberal Democrat, whatever they have, shadow cabinet or whatever, before the general election. And that's what Labour aspire to, a coalition government with them. Now, that's a sign of their lack of confidence, but it's also a question of what they prefer. Nothing must be giving Miliband nightmares like the idea of being swept to power after a mass movement of the working class against austerity. Being booed at the TUC demonstration would be nothing compared to the pressure that a Labour government would come under in that situation. But let's be clear, Ed, with every fibre of his being, and we know this in this room, is trying to make clear to big business that he is an absolutely safe pair of hands. That speech he made at the Labour Party conference, come to that, the one at the demonstration as well. The speech at the Labour Party conference was partly about showing that he was capable of talking without notes, woohoo, big deal, but it was also about showing that he was safe for big business. And we have to remember, socialism terrifies the capitalists in this country. Any hint, even the faintest pink, terrifies them. That's why the keynote in Ed's speech was the endless repeat of One Nation, the Tory slogan, and the fact that he said, effectively, my father will be ashamed of me because I am not a red Ed. And he got what he wanted because the next day, the Financial Times had a major article saying, Ed's okay, they'd be all right, they're a safe pair of hands. That brings home to us that our role in fighting to rearm the working class is the industrial issues that we've discussed this weekend. But the question of a political alternative is also increasingly urgent. It's great that the RMT have unanimously agreed to back the trade unionist and socialist coalition. But we must go from here and have a campaign across the trade union movement to build support for Tusk across all unions. It's very good that we're standing more in elections, that we're standing for the Bristol Mayor, that we're standing in the by-election in Manchester Central. We haven't discussed it yet in the Socialist Party, or come to that on the Tusk Steering Committee, but there's a certain Labour MP in Rotherham who's had to resign for expenses fiddling on an epic scale, and I know that the Yorkshire Socialist Party are very enthusiastic about Tusk going out again. Who better than us, with our record of workers' MPs on workers' wages, than to stand in that by-election in Rotherham? So we have to step up the work with Tusk, and even if we don't get big votes at this point in time, it's preparing the ground and putting the arguments for socialism and the case for a party that is against the austerity that is raining down from all of the others. But through all of our work, we have to link the day-to-day struggles to the crucial question of the socialist transformation of society. The CBI have told us what capitalism means in Britain today. The new normal is going to be muted growth, is how they put it. We know what that means. Muted growth means stagnation at best. It means mass unemployment, factories closing, more and more people sleeping on the streets. That's the future under capitalism in Britain. It takes time for it to sink in, for people to realise that this new normal is not temporary. It's what we've got permanent. It's the nature of capitalism today. But part of our role, as Matt said when he spoke, is to argue for a socialist alternative, to put the case for a different kind of society. There is no lack of wealth. The elite internationally have £20 trillion hidden in Swiss bank accounts and other offshore bank accounts. That is more than the debts of all of the OECD countries around the world. But the only way that it's possible to overcome endless austerity is by taking the banks into democratic public ownership, thanks to the FBU, now the policy of the TUC, but also to go beyond that and take all of the corporations that dominate our economy out of the hands of a tiny elite and to build a socialist society that can meet the needs of all. In South Africa, again, it's been talked about a lot this weekend, but you can begin to see a process where an idea that has been the property of a handful in reality in South Africa, of our section and some other socialists, the ideas of socialism, are now being heard by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even potentially of millions. And how if we can organise that, then there is the possibility of socialist ideas becoming a material force that can change the world. You can't jump over history. We cannot win hundreds of thousands to socialism by shouting more, leafleting more. We should do all of those things, standing in elections more. And if we do it, we can win thousands to our ideas now, particularly because it is clear to workers that we are becoming a factor in events. That's what Steve said about why he decided to join the Socialist Party, because we were playing a role in fighting to change the situation in Britain. But we won't win right now the hundreds of thousands. But in the epic battles that are coming, just like our small South African section went from talking to a few hundred to talking to hundreds of thousands, we are going to have opportunities to turn socialist ideas into a material force here in Britain, to win hundreds of thousands to that programme. What we're doing now is the preparation for that. And we don't have unlimited time. The pace of history is moving up. So if there's one thing, one conclusion that we take away from socialism this weekend, it is to redouble our efforts, to go back to your universities, your colleges, your workplaces, and argue the case for a 24-hour general strike. Campaign to make that a reality. Build Tusk. But also win workers and young people to our party, to the Socialist Party, to the programme of Marxism, so that we have the maximum possible forces for the mighty struggles that are coming.